Welcome back to Knocking to 10, real stories from go-to-market leaders scaling from 0 to 10 million and beyond. Today's guest, Taylor Martino, has built high-performing BDR teams and helped first-time sales leaders avoid the traps that kill early growth. This chat's going to be quite tactical. Taylor has helped many seed and Series A companies stand up outbound engines, hire and coach their first reps, and avoid the painful mistakes that stall pipeline. Taylor, awesome to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So Taylor, you have a pretty unique and incredible background. You were an elite athlete in college. Did I have it right? You're a national champion diver?
Yes.
How did you go from national champion diver to leader of Taylor Martino's sales coaching?
Yeah, I actually started diving when I was 8 years old. And so for me, that really set the stage as to my commitment, my dedication. You learn all of those fundamental skills through athletics. And I got on the national team when I was about 14 years old. So From there, I got to continue to travel the world, make all these great connections, and ended up getting a scholarship to the University of Houston for school. So from there, after a couple years, went to NCAAs, all of those things, I got a really bad spinal injury. And so that cut my diving career short right before the 2016 Olympics. So that piece of rejection almost and having to overcome those obstacles, I had to find a new identity for myself. I was the diver. When you do something so niche, that's who you are, right? And a lot of athletes feel that way. So having to transition to something, I needed an outlet for my competitive drive, right? Something that would keep me scheduled, something with goals. And I found my way to sales, loved it. But what I really loved about sales was leading. And so quickly made my way into leadership, have really loved that whole environment of coaching people to be better than I ever was at selling. That's been really, I would say, driving factor as to why I've created my coaching business.
Yeah. Now, I imagine, over the course of your diving career, you worked with a number of really incredible coaches. Are there any to you that kind of stand out or that were sort of formative in your experience when you think about your athletic coaches?
Yeah, I had the same coach from when I was 8 until I went to college at 18. So for 10 years, my diving coach was a Olympian. She competed for Romania, but she was a finalist. She wasn't a medalist.
Okay.
And I think there's a really distinct difference in that she wanted to be a medalist, but she never was. And so she poured into us as athletes to make us ready to be Olympic champions because she always wanted that. So she had that drive to push us forward. And really gave us those fundamental skills to be incredible divers, but great competitors.
Yeah. Is there anything that stands out to you about perhaps her routine or her habits that you found to be quite unique or special that you can kind of relate back to the world of sales?
Yeah, we were on a very strict schedule. And I would say that is why I am so routine based and so scheduled in my life, is because from the age of 8, I practiced before school, after school, Friday nights, Saturdays. And if you were late, you were doing laps, you were doing extra dives. So you learned very quickly, I need to be on time and I need to be prepared. And that's how I show up in sales.
Have you ever carried any of that forward? Have you ever practiced the concept of, I don't know, what would you call it, discipline for sales reps that maybe don't hit their activity metrics or things of that nature?
Yeah. Right? So for diving, if I, let's say, was late, we would have to do pike-ups. So that's when you lay down and do your toe touches. So I wouldn't make my reps do toe touches, let's say, but do you have to do some extra calls?
Yep.
Maybe, right? Things like that to set the stage as to these are my expectations and how we're going to build a high-performing team. I need you to show up prepared.
Yeah. Okay, so Taylor, you in your coaching business right now, you're working with lots of companies that are kind of in that initial sort of growth stage, or they're entering that kind of hyper growth stage. In that role, you oftentimes come into working with either heads of sales, VPs of sales, whatever it might be, who are kind of stepping into their first time manager role. So most likely these individuals probably crushed it as an individual contributor or brought tons of energy, enthusiasm. But they're now stepping into a new role, whether it's just because the company needed them to, or perhaps, they were really ready for that next step. Talk to me a little bit about, the number one blind spot you see for these reps as it relates to, okay, I'm going from individual contributor to I now need to look out for my team.
Yeah, that is such a critical turning point in someone's career, going from individual contributor to first-time leader. And there is a real identity shift in that role, right? When you are an individual contributor, it is all about you. It is all in your control how successful you are. And making that shift to leader, yes, everybody you're responsible for them, but a lot of it is outside of your direct control. And how do you transfer that accountability and responsibility to other people, and not only do that, but empower them to be, like I said earlier, better than you were at the job. So it's very hard for people to step out of selling and start going into leading and teaching them how to sell, right? We don't want to create carbon copy clones of ourselves, because you and I, John, would sell very differently. We just have different personalities. And we have to figure out as leaders how to make those personality traits shine and not have someone sell just because I did it that way.
Yeah. I'm curious your take. Oftentimes, in that kind of earlier growth stage, maybe it's less than 10 total commercial team members. Managers are sort of tasked with being a player coach. What are kind of your reflections on, is a player coach role, particularly for a first-time manager, is that a healthy environment? Or perhaps are we, handicapping or holding people back by not allowing them to be that full manager? Kind of talk me through some of those pros and cons of what you've seen in your experience of full-time manager versus player coach.
I actually was hoping you were going to ask this question. And so I'm glad you asked, because I think that the player coach role is a mistake. I don't believe in how that is set up. And I get that sometimes it needs to happen from a cost perspective, but the leader of a growing sales team, a first-time sales org, is so important, right? You need to be fully invested in training, coaching that team. There is not always enough time to sell or to coach other people. And one of them always takes priority, and it is oftentimes selling, because that is where they will make the most money. So if we really want to scale a team, we need a leader. Maybe it's fractional, maybe it's full-time, but someone that is focused on training, coaching, and growing that team.
Okay, so ensuring that their incentives aren't mismatched and that they're not too worried about their own quota. They're really focused on their team as their, primary aspect, and perhaps is really thinking through their growth plan as a manager. You've spoken about this before on some other podcasts, but I'd love to dive into with you. You have this concept of kind of like putting together a leadership onboarding plan, or like what a 90-day success plan looks like. What are some of the criteria that you think about for a manager to sort of establish, learn, and participate in over a period of, say, 3 months?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those first 3 months, those first 90 days are really critical as you step into that new leadership role. The first piece that I focus on is that mindset and your identity as a sales leader, right? It's understanding the type of leader you want to be known as not just this high performing seller anymore. And also thinking about what tools are you going to use for regulating that stress, handling rejection at scale from all of these reps, and bouncing back from those setbacks in a different way than when it happened directly to you. And how do you motivate other people? The next piece that I like to focus on is goal setting and performance management. A lot of these reps who are now managers have never led a tough conversation. They've never had to set goals or hire and onboard people. So we do need to walk them through what that looks like in terms of maintaining a clear team vision that aligns with the culture and the goals we're trying to accomplish. After that, I would go into coaching, communication, right? Effective one-on-one conversations. That's where trust is built. That's where you're going to figure out who's going to be successful in this role. How do I motivate you? What are you trying to accomplish? Because it's probably different than what I'm trying to accomplish.
Sure.
And the last piece that I focus on, and that's really more, day 80, is that strategic leadership, cross-functional influence. How are we selling internally and working on our upward influence in the company? How can I communicate with the founder to get what I need for my team to be successful? The executive language, making sure that our goals align with the initiatives of the company, those business outcomes, and delegating and protecting our time to do it.
Yeah. Do you, it's interesting. It seems like a lot to do, and it's self-reflection, it's learning, it's learning how to be a better teammate, a better manager, how to deal with your new kind of peer group, and how to manage up, et cetera. That seems like a lot packed into a small period of time. What is your experience on this? Can this kind of coaching and learning, can it be done by the founder internally? Like, have you seen this done successfully internally? I'm curious what that would look like.
Yeah, I think you can do it internally if you have the tools and resources to have those conversations. The biggest thing that I believe it comes down to is having the one-on-one coaching and I would say trust with another leader in the company to help you accomplish those things.
Yeah,
Of course, I'll plug, what I do, which is
sure.
this and helping people get to where they want to go. But you can set up these checkpoints to make sure that we are accomplishing those things. I just think it comes down to having a strong founder leader relationship, and that there is trust and guidance that happens there.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally from my experience, my first time kind of being thrust into this, we were like a seed stage company and we just started to kind of onboard our first reps. And I kind of got thrown into that manager role because I was probably the oldest one on the team. I didn't have a ton of sales experience. I previously had worked in finance. And perhaps the best thing that ever happened for my career was the founder had kind of the vision to bring in like a professional sales coach. And at the time, I was a little nervous and shy. Is this person stepping on my toes? Is this person going to become the manager? Like, is this going to slow down my growth? And if anything, it was the exact opposite. I found that like in a period of maybe 1 or 2 months, my learning accelerated dramatically. And I don't think it was because the founder didn't want my learning to grow or didn't want to be there. He just he didn't have the time. We were too small. He was dealing with investors and other in product and other aspects of the business. And even if he, did want to or did have the skill set to teach me, he did not have the time. And I found that this completely changed the trajectory of my career. And in a very short window of time. And not only did he help me, I actually felt he helped our founder have a better job of managing his relationship with the team. And so across the board of these four things you mentioned, internal reflection, how you deal with your teammates, how you deal with your manager, et cetera, felt like it really brought in a outside perspective that actually allowed us to thrive. So I've actually lived the experience you've just shared and could not recommend it any more highly, particularly for teams that are starting to, grow with a bit more cadence and speed where that balance of time, to your point, can you actually meet consistently is going to be hard to pull off. So really in line with that. Let's kind of move on to something a little bit different here. Let's jump into the idea of kind of compensation. I'm thinking back to saying, okay, we're not going to do player coach. We're going to jump into a full manager here. How do we think about sort of first time manager, thinking about designing your comp plans and doing so in a way that's going to sort of not only excite your team, but make sure that as you continue to sort of scale up, that you're not going to have to continue to revise these over and over again?
Yes. And so when I was building out our business development department, we changed the comp plan, I want to say at least 5 times, and we changed it the first time within 3 weeks. So
Okay.
that was not a good start, I'd say.
Over how long of a period of time, maybe?
I would say it was 10 months. We changed it. And
So
they kept this final comp plan for at least 2 years. I still get word that that's the comp plan they're using, which is great.
Where were
Because
you when this was happening? Where were you working?
this was at Talru, so this is an HRIS company, so it helps staffing.
And your role at the time was?
Business development director, yeah.
Okay. And was this your first time stepping into that role?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. And who was part of your peer group working together to put together these compensation plans?
My VP of sales was super involved, but I also had a BDR manager that I worked with over the next couple months. This first comp plan, I designed it with another AE manager. So we were really just being scrappy, trying to figure out how do we kick this off. So I'd say that was my core peer group. Over time, the BDR manager came in and we were able to bounce ideas off of each other. And then the last person we would always consult with, obviously, was our CEO.
Okay. So tell me about this kind of construct, what this looked like in the beginning and kind of where you ultimately evolved to. Share some of these kind of learnings over time of, I guess, I wouldn't call it going through failure, but going through struggles and challenges to get to the right plan.
I am all about failing forward, right? If we can't admit that we're making mistakes, then we'll never be able to learn from them. So the first comp plan, we had to change it within 3 weeks because no one was making any money. It was just not set up to motivate them to be successful. This comp plan, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, was just on deals, discovery calls set.
Right.
That didn't help us hold any meetings. And they were holding meetings, which they should be compensated for.
Yeah.
That's a clear, idea in my head, at least at this time.
Yep.
So we reiterated a few times. One of the most detrimental comp plans, I'll say, was when we compensated based on discovery calls set, discovery calls held, and deals closed.
Okay.
And I will say that was really detrimental to the reps because of how it impacted their mindset on the floor. Well, closing deals is so far removed from what they're responsible for and can impact that it was such a negative blow to them being able to earn the compensation that they were expected to.
Sure.
So we took something that should be in their control, took it out of it, and it really demotivated them and decreased how many sets we had and holds.
Yeah.
So because of that mental shift, it made it really hard to keep them motivated to do their job when we took some of it out of their control.
Sure.
The comp plan that we have ended on and that I'm really excited about and would definitely recommend is actually paying them based on who the meeting is held with.
Okay.
Right. So understanding your ideal client profile, who is a mobilizer to your deal? Is it a VP? Is it a director? Is it a founder? Who are you selling to that can move the deals forward? Mm-hmm. We were able to identify that the meeting set with the manager, it probably won't close and it's going to take 6 times longer, right? It's kind of obvious. But when you really think about it, okay, then I'd rather you set meetings with VPs of sales because they can get it done and it's going to be so much faster. It'll get done in 1 month. Yep. So we would pay them different amounts based on who the meeting was set with in different groups. So, CEOs, VPs, they would need 6 of those, let's say.
Yep.
If they did managers, they'd need 30.
Interesting.
So it incentivized them to do it right.
Could they, if they brought the whole buying committee into one meeting, could they get multiple points?
They would get the highest points.
But so you join an all hands meeting and hit your quota.
Yeah. We didn't have anyone push it too hard, but that compensation plan excited them because they could do more strategic outreach and make more money.
Yeah. And just kind of make this more practical for the audience. How long was the deal cycle on average?
About 3 months.
Okay. So this is sort of would you call it kind of mid-market side?
Yeah, we were trying to move into the enterprise space. That was a goal, but most of our BDR outreach was specifically for the mid-market.
So typically it would be at least 1 to 2 meetings of discovery that were happening to get to the right decision makers. And that's kind of why you align the incentives to help people move up. Is that right?
Yes. If we were meeting with the right people, we could have a discovery call, go into the demo phase from there. If we were meeting with someone that was not the right level, we would probably do 3 discovery calls before we were really in a demo phase.
Yeah. Okay. And so made these changes, put them into place. What were like the fastest learnings from this? Did the team feel like there was more clarity? Like ultimately by aligning to the ICP, what are kind of the main takeaways here?
Yeah. I think clarity, purpose, and psychological safety are 3 of the key aspects of a high-performing team. So being able to communicate with them honestly about why we were making these changes and why we needed to incentivize them differently, I believe that really helped in terms of them understanding not only why they were paid that way, but also the needs of the business and allowing them to think more strategically about their role, right? I think a lot of times when you're just booking meetings, you're just on the phone, you can think pretty lowly of yourself when that is a real fundamental success metric for a company. And so letting them know how valuable they were, that we had to get their incentives right for us to be successful, I think that clarity was really impactful for them.
Amazing. And I imagine that helped with retention and kind of overall team camaraderie and spirit.
Yeah, when you're changing comp plans, retention is a big risk because you are messing with someone's money. But having those conversations, we were able to really foster a group that was excited about what we were doing. And I think that really helped in terms of not only keeping them, but promoting them.
Yeah. Okay. So now you've got, your first-time manager is having the right coaching, right practice. They're in a good place. You've helped them sort of think through structuring their compensation plans. Now let's talk about like the reality when things kind of get messy, because no growth stage startup comes without any chaos.
Yeah.
You speak a lot about putting together coaching cadences that ultimately help orgs stay on track and stay consistent. Talk to me a little bit about what it means to have a coaching cadence to ensure consistency and success for your BRGs.
Yeah, I think for the consistency factor, it does come down to how much time you have available. So are you a player coach? You'll have less time. But
Yeah.
if you are a dedicated leader, I think it's very fair to be asking for, especially in those early stages, everyone's quite new, to be meeting with someone once a week to
Yeah.
really dive into what they're doing and what they need help with. And I say that differently because it's not a pipeline review.
Okay.
There are two distinct things in coaching. One is actually coaching and training, and how are we having these conversations? Let's role play. What objection are you stuck on? What's mentally blocking you from having this tough conversation versus what's in your pipeline? What's going on with this deal? How are we going to get to the next level? Those are two different factors, but those coaching conversations need to come first, in my opinion.
And do you recommend hosting them as like separate times, like not 15 minutes and then second half we'll do pipeline, like separate days?
I would do it separately. The
Yeah.
coaching conversations, I think weekly, and I think pipeline can be bi-weekly, especially in the beginning. Pipeline's probably not that big, so we can hammer down everything. But the coaching conversations, they need to know that those are the priority.
Okay. And particularly you're thinking more towards this sort of mid-market to enterprise sale where it might be comped on a quarterly basis, most likely not on a monthly. Okay.
Yeah, I think monthly might be a little bit aggressive.
If you were to put yourself back in the sort of manager's shoes, how do you think about maybe structuring your week to be most effective? For example, do you try to do all of these 15-minute check-ins on the same day? Do you like to spread them out? How do you think about sort of managing kind of yourself reflectively to put yourself in the best position to be that great manager for your team? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think making sure that people know how you're going to show up is a really big thing in terms of setting consistent standards for the team. So how do they know they'll see you every Monday morning? I think that sets the tone for the whole week. So I would always start the week with a group meeting, really just to hype up, hey, what are we getting done this week? We really did great on this last week. We have these goals for this week. I'm so excited to be here. Let's get to work. Really just to set the stage. I always try to do my one-on-ones in the first half of the week, because I want them to have takeaways that they can keep working on before they forget over the weekend. Just being, realistic. People don't remember everything. So if we can lock in our one-on-ones early, then later in the week, we can do more team trainings, team coachings. They have more time to be with their clients and get things done.
Yeah. Now, how about when things are not going to plan? So, you obviously, even if you're checking with reps on a regular basis, it's just bound to happen. Say a particular rep is kind of, heading towards a PIP or just, kind of underperformance. How do you think about maybe changing that cadence? What does that look like from like a best practices perspective?
Yeah, I think with reps that are trending towards PIPs, it's really easy to either stop coaching or to hammer in too hard. So I would always have that conversation with the rep, because that was part of our PIP process as well, as like, what are you expecting to accomplish and what do you need from me to get it done? Let's set clear standards for both of us. So I know what you are going to be doing and I know what you need of me. Because if someone's on a PIP, that is also a reflection of the leader. It's our job to make sure everyone's successful. So I want to make sure that I'm doing my best to support you. If they don't know what they need, I think that's also one of those red flags that maybe this might not be the right fit. But if they can give you tactical, actionable things, you have to get them done. They need to be a priority, and you need to adjust your time elsewhere. But if someone's on a PIP and they have a plan, we need to dive into that plan.
How do you think, say you're a first-time manager, first kind of experience going through a PIP, how do they balance, or how would you recommend balancing that kind of maybe urge to be more of that player coach? So something seems to be kind of going off track, coming from a former IC, feeling like, oh, I can just jump in here and kind of change things or steer the direction. Why don't I get more involved? What would be sort of your guidance as to, how to maintain boundaries and make sure like you don't allow yourself to kind of fall into that trap of just going back into that IC and trying to like kind of overcompensate or take control? How would you think about guiding this first time manager of setting themselves up for success?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, can the rep actually do that job, right? Do they have the training and the coaching that they know how to have those conversations? Is it something they've learned? And we have to be honest with ourselves. If they have learned those skills, sometimes they just haven't, and they don't have enough practice. And I think that is a hard reflection to make as a leader, that not only do I think I do a better job, but I haven't taught them how to do it. So I do think there is a time you need to have that conversation with the rep. Okay, do we know how to have this conversation? Let's role play it, and then you can give it a try. I'll be there for backup, but I'm only going to hit on these two things if you need me, and putting them more at ease, but still making sure that they're the forefront of that conversation, and then doing more training with them after. That is the job of a manager. So I think that's a key piece. But we also have to remember, if we are the key thing that makes a deal close, or if people can't win business without us there, we're not leading, we're really just bottlenecks. And that's not going to scale. We have to empower our team to fail forward, like I said, and try to close those deals within the boundaries they can.
Yeah. Okay. Now you've done this several times now as a manager, as part of a team, and now you've coached numerous companies, set up their first teams. When you think about the process of kind of going from zero up to, your first few million up to kind of 10 million, talk to me a little bit about processes and systems that you like to implement at that sort of seed plus stage. And what do best practices look like when you want to put the frameworks and systems in place for BDR teams to be successful?
Yeah, I think when you're building out a BDR program, let's say from scratch, or even your account executive team, the first system you really need isn't just a tool. It's really a repeatable message to meeting playbook. And that's something I think that a lot of people miss. So what we really need is that clear ICP criteria, like we talked about, right? Your ideal client profile, who specifically is it? Then we need to identify 3 to 5 core message problem statements that tie to pain, not just product features. And I know that's a really easy trap to fall into with a new exciting company, is we just want to talk about those features, but it has to tie to pain. Then we need the messaging that maps to those problems for all of our different outreach channels. Cold calling, emails, LinkedIn, videos. The messaging we have has to align with those problems. And then lastly, which I think is most important, is the feedback loop. We need a quick feedback loop so that reps can change it up very quickly, at least weekly. So how does the manager get the information that was successful or what didn't resonate? And so that's a mistake I think founders make so often, is trying to scale their outreach before they know what message actually is landing. And so in those first 4 weeks, we're not trying to scale volume. It's really just proving the resonance of the messaging.
Okay. And who is typically, what is the group that's in the room that helps sort of put together this messaging framework? Who do you like to include? Obviously, you're talking about how reps are the ones that need to bring the feedback, but when you're putting that first messaging together, is it the founder and the head of sales? Is it somebody from marketing? What does that room typically look like?
Yeah, I would highly recommend that marketing or sales or the founder, we have some client interviews if we already have clients, right? Yeah. Why did we buy this tool? What is the key time saver that it gives you, right? Having those interview kind of conversations to know the solution it solves from their own language, I think makes a big difference. But definitely founder, marketing if they have it, head of sales, definitely.
Yeah, from my experience, I've had a few times where the founder has been involved in the room, and perhaps maybe the founder's messaging may sound a little bit more like their pitch deck than maybe the reality.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that experience? I'm curious how maybe you balance the reality when you have very kind of gung-ho founders, leaders that are pushing kind of what they want to become versus the reality, and how you set up sales teams for success. Kind of what are maybe some thoughts here on how you balance that in sort of a way that will set the sales leader up to success without kind of becoming too confrontational?
Yeah, that's why I recommend those client interviews, because they can tell you word for word what we're actually solving for and the benefits that they're getting from it. I think especially for a lot of early companies, they're very product focused. Yep. And that's why it's so easy to get into the features and the bells and whistles that maybe aren't even there yet. But we have to focus on selling what we can actually provide. Yes, having the roadmap of what we're going to become is huge, and people love to hear that, but that's not going to close business today. So having word for word come from this client, this client, this client, in my experience, that's made it easier for sales to craft that message that will actually land with the audience.
Yeah. Any particular mistakes you see founders making when hiring kind of their first handful of outbound reps?
Yes, I think it's very easy to see the names on LinkedIn, the people who work at those flashy companies that are everywhere. They have 150% to quota. They're 10 times President's Club, and they go after them. Yeah. And I'm not saying that's bad, but they're selling something that is very name brand, and they have great recognition steps in place, like President's Club, like all of these extra perks, and they have probably a greater marketing budget than this company will be able to afford. And so trying to not only convince them to take this jump to a startup, which will be riskier, have less rewards like President's Club and less marketing budget, I think they waste a lot of time doing that. Where what we should do is go after those hunters, the people that are very hungry and want to build something for themselves, almost those entrepreneurial people, and they're probably not working at the biggest name companies.
Yeah. How do you identify a hunter? What are maybe some personality traits or maybe some experience that you would look for that would kind of help you read between the lines?
Yeah, I think hiring someone that actually has a side hustle or did have a side hustle would be
Okay.
a great, check mark on their resume, because it shows they're able to be gritty, work
Mhm.
from the ground up, be innovative and creative in how they get things done. For startups, we want people that think outside the box. They can have big ideas. And so in the interview process, if you could incorporate something like that, like tell me your craziest idea you've ever had, or pitch me on a company that doesn't exist, things like that that get the ball rolling, and you can see how they'll
Yep.
think about how to close a deal.
Yeah. Um, okay, let's jump into maybe a few rapid fire, and then we'll wrap it up. But so, we talked from the beginning, we talked about kind of amazing athletic coaches that you had throughout your experience. You've worked at a number of hypergrowth startups, and now, you're yourself are in this active coaching role, working with many different founders and sales leaders. What is maybe some of the hardest coaching lessons you've had to learn along the way, like through the experience yourself?
Yeah. One I actually posted about this the other week was letting a poor performer stay on my team for too long.
Okay.
That was really hard for me to deal with as a leader, because I really thought that if I invested more in them, if they just had some more coaching, they were on a PIP almost every other month, but
Mhm.
they'd always make it off the PIP, but never do well enough to get into a group.
Mhm.
And they added great morale to my team in the beginning. They were always super positive. They had a great attitude, and I couldn't wrap my head around why they weren't successful.
Mhm.
And I really made that about me, and that I needed to make them successful. And to be honest, we had psychological safety on my team. I'm really lucky about that. That rep started telling me, hey, this isn't fair. You hold me to this standard, but they're only held to this standard. And it really started to impact the morale of my team and the performance we were getting, because I let a poor performer stay for
Mhm.
so long.
So a
So,
top performer was saying that to you. Okay.
and that was really tough. So having to know the balance of when to PIP, when not to PIP, and when to move on,
Mhm.
I think is a really big lesson, especially when you invest so much in people.
Yeah. Have you ever found that's an opportunity to perhaps engage like one of your peers, or bring in a third party? I'm curious, like, do you have any sort of suggestions as to how another sales leader could kind of work through that process when they're on the fence? If someone's on and they're off, and you want them to succeed, and the challenge and process that goes through hiring a new rep, onboarding a new rep. So like, you're dealing with potentially a few other months of kind of loss if you have to move away. What would you advise to help people make the best decision?
Yeah, one of the things that I should have done, then thinking back, I know would have been impactful, is if I had one of the other managers have a one-on-one with them and identify areas of improvement they needed,
Yeah.
or really give me their feedback and what they saw in this rep. And that might not be applicable for founders, but if you can meet with a peer, maybe outside of the company, explain the situation, maybe share them a call.
Yeah.
Hey, what do you think? How would you handle this situation? And give them the rundown. They'll probably tell you what you don't want to hear.
Yeah. Okay. How about greatest piece of advice maybe you've learned through your sales career from either a mentor or a coach?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is that we are our thoughts, right? Your thoughts become your reality. And so if I believe that I'm too new to make an impact, or this company's too small to grow, that's going to be the reality. Whereas if we can show up every day and start thinking about the right thoughts that put us in position to win, that's the thing I've always done my whole life. We have to be the most optimistic version of ourselves. Doesn't mean living in delusion, but if I want to hit my annual quota, I'm going to talk about it like it's happening. We are hitting our quota this year because I'm going to train the team. We're going to make sure our message lands. all of those things. We have to speak things into existence.
Yeah, that's amazing. I completely agree. Well, Taylor, this has been a clinic, or maybe I should say swim meet. I don't know the proper term for a dive.
Yeah.
Where's the best place for folks to connect and follow along with your work?
Yes, check me out on LinkedIn. I'm there every single day. Taylor Martino. Keep it pretty simple.
Amazing. That's it for Knocking to 10. And if you like this conversation, subscribe, review, follow along. Check out knock2.ai if you're interested in turning your anonymous website traffic into pipeline. Taylor, thanks so much for coming on.